Hello and welcome to Study with Sudhir. This is your favorite digital classroom. My name is T.S. Sudhir. In video 1 of our Study with Sudhir series on the ISC English Language Paper for class 11 as well as class 12, we had kind of laid out the broad contours, the broad guidelines that you need to follow in order to do well in this paper, and I had given you 10 broad tips. Now we are going to get into specifics. Okay. The first specific is about newspaper writing, newspaper report writing, and I think as a journalist I am well qualified to be able to explain that to you. Now before we get down to the specifics of newspaper report writing, which is now of what I think 15 marks, there are 3 things that you need to bear in mind, right, in order to write a good quality newspaper report. First of all, be interested in news, be interested in what's happening around you, in your city, in your state, in your country, in the world, right? Number 2, know how news is presented, especially in the written format. Okay, be aware of that. Point number 3, and this is most important, know that what comes on your WhatsApp is not news. A forward from an unverified source, you have no clue to who has actually written that, you have no idea about the authenticity of that particular information. That's not news, and the way it is written is certainly not the way news ought to be presented. So be very wary of trying to copy the style of a WhatsApp forward or trying to copy the content format of a WhatsApp forward, right? So these are 3 broad things that you need to bear in mind. Now in video number 1, I had mentioned one key fact which will be very important to write newspaper reports, which is to develop the habit of reading at least one newspaper every day, one English newspaper every day. Now, while edit page columns, which I had suggested that you should read, especially with an eye on writing the composition, it will give you the ammunition and the styling idea on how to build an argument, which will be very useful when you are writing your composition, right? Reading and understanding how a newspaper report is written on page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6 of your of the newspaper, or even the sports page, which is usually the second last or the last page, will actually help you a lot in doing well in the examination, especially when it comes to writing a newspaper report. So in your own interest, start reading newspapers. Start reading newspapers. It could be a physical newspaper, it could be an e-paper, but all I am bothered about is that you should read news, right? And as I said, not on WhatsApp forwards. Now let's focus on the format. Please keep taking notes because this will be useful. It's not this kind of stuff that you find in various guidebooks, right? It's a combination of what needs to be done and also from the experience of having written thousands of newspaper reports that I am bringing this to you. The headline has to be catchy. See, if you write a very boring headline, I'll give you an example. President Kovind calls for peace in the country. I mean, we all know that, right? It is a boring label headline, as we call it in journalistic parlance. You need to be a little more direct and write something which kind of catches the attention. I'm not saying that the first one is factually incorrect, but it is not catchy enough to grab the headline. At the same time, you cannot write a sensational or a clickbait headline just and be factually incorrect just to grab the attention of the reader. So it has to be factually correct, but at the same time written in an interesting manner so that you are able to grab the attention of the reader. Because remember, at the end of the day, the newspaper is a product. You are trying to sell the product to maximum number of people so that maximum number of readers actually read what you write. Unless anyone reads what you write, your newspaper is not going to do well. Your own value as a journalist is going to go southwards. So a clickbait headline is considered cheap tactics, and also a headline, point number 2, should basically sum up the story in about 4 to 6 words, 7 words maximum depending on the space. But yeah, a 4 to 5 to 6 words max is absolutely ideal. Now let's take the example of a question which came in ISA 2017 question. paper examination. Now it said, as a reporter, you have visited a number of hospitals in your city. Write a newspaper report of not more than 300 words based on the following points. And they had mentioned a lot of points: building and infrastructure, maintenance of hospital, quality of services, doctors and nursing staff, emergency facilities, and a few other points. They had also said that write it under the headline of city hospitals, which I believe is an absolutely label headline. But in case if the headline has not been suggested by the council, we will come to that. Now the report has to tell a story, right? It cannot be hospitals are essential services in any city. We go to hospitals when everyone has to go to a hospital when he is unwell. We are not writing an essay. Remember, there is a difference between an essay and a newspaper report, right? So your headline could be doctors and nurses agitated over long working hours at Hyderabad hospital. Though it's a little long, but yeah, I mean, you could kind of make it crisp, but that can be one possible headline. You can construct a story which can be imaginary but has to sound real. You understand? I repeat, it can be imaginary but has to sound real. It could be leaking roof at city hospital worries patients, right? This is a usual problem during the monsoon season. Or monsoon trouble at city hospital. Or something like, at city hospital, dogs share bed with patients. This is another very common problem at many of the hospitals, government hospitals in particular, in small towns, right? It happens, or hospitals which are very old, or in small district towns. It happens quite often. And when you write like that, and you can imagine accompanied by a photograph, it will immediately prompt the reader to read what you have written. The next thing after the headline comes the byline. Byline is essentially who has written the story. Usually, if it's a special story or an exclusive story, you get your byline, like it will be by T.S. Sudhir. But usually in newspaper reports of this kind, the kind which are suggested in your question paper, it's safe to write by our staff reporter or by a staff reporter. That's the usual format followed in by newspapers in general. The third, as part of the format, has to be the place and the date line, which essentially means Hyderabad, 18th September, whatever be the date. You can write 18th September, that's the usual, or September 18, that's the usual format followed by most newspapers again, right? Now we come to the lead paragraph, and this is very important. You get marks for the format, so don't go with the wrong with the format and unnecessarily lose marks. Now we come to the lead paragraph. The lead is the opening paragraph of the newspaper report. It should be a short, crisp paragraph. It needs to come to the news point straight, right? And grab the reader's attention and make them want to read more. These are the three things which you need to remember, right? Now, for instance, I'll give an example again of following from the headline that I had written. Patients at the Hyderabad General Hospital are struggling to get a bed to themselves. Images of stray dogs sharing the bed have surfaced, shocking the relatives of the patients. They have now demanded action against the hospital administration, seeking better infrastructure facilities at the hospital. Now, straight away, you have pointed to a very specific problem at the hospital. You have also linked it to the infrastructure, which is one of the points that the essay wants you to cover, the council wants you to cover. Next we can come to, you can quote some doctor, you can quote the medical superintendent of the hospital, you can quote a nurse saying that, oh, the other day a dog kind of bit me or chased me. You can quote some relatives, you can relate it to the other issues at the hospital and make it a comprehensive and interesting report, an imaginary but a very realistic sounding report, right? In the body of the story, and that's what the rest of the story will come to, you will give details of how the hospital reacted, as I just now said, the doctors, the nurses, how the general infrastructure is out there, everything. Now, when you are writing this, make sure you do not use any abbreviations in the body of the story, neither in the lead of the story nor in the body of the story, right? Point number 2, hospital cannot be written as HOSP dot. No, not permitted. Private hospital cannot be written, or government hospital cannot be written as govt.hospital, not in the body of the story. You can write govt dot in the headline of the story. That will be permitted, but not in the body of the story. Now, a couple of things you need to bear in mind when you are writing this newspaper report. The language should not be flashy. Should not be flashy. It should convey that you are reporting the facts and nothing but the truth, right? Please keep this in mind, very, very important. It cannot be colorful kind of language. You are not writing a feature story. You are writing a newspaper report. That's very important. So, keep in mind the distinction. Point number 2, and this is very important, which will be taught to anyone in the first year or the first few classes of journalism at any journalism school. You need to focus on the 5 W's and 1 H. Now, what are the 5 W's and 1 H? The 5 W's of any newspaper report or any newspaper story are why, what, where, when, who. I repeat, why, where, when, what, who, and how. The H. 5 W's and an H, and how of the news event. You need to ensure that your newspaper report is actually answering all the 5 W's and the H, right? So, while you write imaginary stuff, the way you write ought to be very believable. Style of writing, short sentences, formal language, right? It cannot be informal language. There cannot be any WhatsApp language. The reportage has to be crisp. The more crisp and smart the writing, the better marks you will get, and stick to the word limits. If it is 300 words, stick to 300 words plus minus 10-15 words on either side, preferably not less than 300 definitely. Okay, a 280 mark newspaper report won't look very good. Active voice is preferred to passive voice because it is more direct and definitely ends up having more impact. Also, the punctuation, very important. Be very mindful of the commas, right? The colons, and while you are reading your newspapers from now onwards, please keep your eyes trained to notice where and how the commas, the different punctuation marks are actually used in a newspaper report, right? For instance, if you are filing a report on, say, an accident which has taken place in the city, right? So, you need to include, for instance, what the Commissioner of Police has said, because you would expect that the police commissioner would have reached the spot and he would be talking to reporters to give information about how the accident happened, where it happened, when it happened, how it happened, everything, who was involved, you know, the 5 W's and the H. Also, the usage of Mr. and Miss, because as I said, it's formal language, right? So, in this case, just to give an example, the Commissioner of Hyderabad Police, Mr. Anjani Kumar, rushed to the spot to supervise the rescue and relief operations. Speaking to reporters, comma, Mr. Kumar said, comma, double quotes, the situation is now under control. The injured have been rushed to the hospital, full stop, double quotes closed. So, you need to be very careful about the punctuation marks, and I am repeating this so that you do not make those kind of mistakes. So, finally, in order to be able to write a good newspaper report, I would suggest the following 3 things. Read a lot, okay? Practice writing a newspaper report as much as you can. It could be twice a week, 2 reports in a week. If you don't have time, once a week, depends entirely on you, but the more you practice, the better you will get at it. The first 15 minutes of reading time that you will get during the examination, think of the main points, think of the headline, so that your mind is made up before you actually start writing the newspaper report in the examination hall, right? So, please look at the previous year's board paper so that you get an idea about the kind of topics that are asked in your board examination, so that you will be better prepared mentally on what kind of topics you could actually practice in the months ahead of the examinations. I hope this helped. As I said, this series is going to be extremely comprehensive, covering all points, telling you all the points that you need to be aware of while preparing to write a good quality newspaper report, and we will be covering all the topics of English language ISC, both 11th and 12th class, here on Study with Sudhir. Thank you very much for watching.